chanting the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, constantly. And he set the standard for those in the renounced order for their way of living in solitary worship. He was what's called a Bhajananandi. There's a Ghostananandi and a Bhajananandi. The Bhajananandi does not move. He stays in one place and doesn't go outside. And he's always chanting and meditating on the Lord and hearing the pastimes of the Lord and speaking the pastimes of the Lord, like that. The Ghostananandi is a world preacher. They can go anywhere and preach and help all kinds of people to become devotees. So Srila Prabhupada was a Ghostananandi, and Gaura Kishora Babaji was a Bhajananandi, always doing bhajan. And he would do his bhajan in a solitary place, remaining completely independent of others. Now, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's father, was very impressed by Gaura Kishora Babaji's extraordinary renunciation and his pure devotion and his attachment to Lord Krishna. So Gaura Kishora Babaji would often go and visit Bhaktivinoda Thakur's home in Godruma Dwipa, Swananda Sukhada Kunja, where he would listen to Bhaktivinoda Thakur give readings of the Srimad Bhagavatam and discuss Vaishnava theology with him. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the father of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So eventually, Gaura Kishora Babaji met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur when he was still young and before he was a sannyasi. So Gaura Kishora Babaji never accepted service from anyone. He constantly chanted the holy names of the Lord, sometimes counting his rounds on his tulsi mala, or sometimes he would make knots in a rejected piece of cloth and counted the knots on a strip of old cloth. And his favorite texts, the things that he meditated on, were the songs of Narottam Thakur's Partana and the Prema Bhakti Chandrika, which he considered to be his all in all. So, and his renunciation was like that of Raghunath Das Goswami. Now, Raghunath Das Goswami, contrary to Gaura Kishora Babaji, was born in a very wealthy family, extremely wealthy. If you would compare it today, the wealth of his family would be compared to Amazon's boss. That's how wealthy they were. And he, now I'm talking about Raghunath Das Goswami to give you an idea of the renunciation of Gaura Kishora Babaji. He eventually, at the right time, left his family and joined Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he began to demonstrate extreme renunciation. So he would not, he would stand outside the temple in Navadvip, and he would beg alms. So this is in Jagannath Puri, I'm sorry. And then Lord Chaitanya would see him because he would go to the temple of Jagannath every day. Then one day, he didn't see him. And 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 1 month. So he asked his devotee, he said, what happened to Raghunath Das Goswami? And he said, well, he thought it wasn't proper for him to beg at the door or the entrance of the temple of Jagannath. So now he goes behind the temple where the priests throw the prasad to the cows. And whatever the cows don't eat, he collects some of it, washes it, dries it in the sun, and that's what he eats as prasadam. Lord Chaitanya said, oh my God. He said, he has special prasadam, and he hasn't invited me to eat any of it. So he went to see Raghunath Das Goswami, and he said, Raghunath, I hear that you have very special prasadam. He said, huh? What? No. What do you mean special? I don't have any special. No. I hear that you have the very best prasadam, and I want to have some. He said, no, my Lord, that's a rumor. That's not true. I don't have any prasadam at all. And he said, no. And Lord Chaitanya forcibly took some of that dried prasadam that was rejected by the cows, and he ate it. So this is how renounced Raghunath Das Goswami was. And he would also go without eating sometimes. He was not attached. And sleeping, he hardly slept at all, maybe a half an hour only. So Gaura Kishora Babaji now, this is almost 500 years or 400 some years later, he was just as renounced as Raghunath Das Babaji. And there was a song, his favorite song, or his favorite bhajan, was a bhajan that glorified Raghunath Das Goswami and his ecstatic separation for Radharani. And it says, where is the incarnation of love? Radhe Radhe. Glories to Radha. Show yourself to me, Radha. Give me back my life. I have become a beggar for you, Radha, and I am calling you, O Radha. You are in Vrindavan with your Krishna. You enchant Krishna's mind. You are chief amongst the 8 Sakhis and are the daughter of Rishabhana. Raghunath Das Goswami regularly, constantly calls out to you, Radha. He calls for you in Keshigat, in Vamsi Bata, in Niduvana, in Kunjavana, in Radha Kunda, in Shamakunda, in the Kusumavana and Govardhana, in Talavana and Tamalavana. He calls out wearing only a worn and dirty cloth and rolling in the Vrindavan dust, the names of Radha on his lips. His eyes are filled with tears. He wanders through every part of Vraja, calling Radha's name night or day. For 23 hours he thinks of nothing but Radha and Govinda, and when he sleeps, he dreams of Radha and Govinda. So, Gaura Kishora Babaji would often sing this bhajan, and it was his favorite bhajan. Okay, so then Bhaktivinoda Thakur told his son, Bhaktisiddhanta, that he should be initiated by Gaura Kishora Babaji. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur already accepted his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as his Shiksha Guru. But then, and by the way, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was highly educated. He could speak better King's English than the English could. That's how educated he was. And he was the #1 astrologer in all of India. And he wrote several books on astrology that are still studied today. And he was a renowned scholar. When he was only 7 years old, he already had memorized the entire Bhagavad-Gita and could recite it and explain it correctly. Not simply recite the verses, but he could explain each verse, each word by word. Right? So, and that was when he was 7. So imagine now he's in his 20s, and he's or close to 30, and he's highly recognized scholar of Sanskrit and Vedic philosophy and astrology, and he was a great preacher. He could defeat anyone in discussion of the Vedas, any part of the Vedas. You could choose whatever Veda, part of the Vedas you wanted, and no one could defeat him. He's in discussions. So, in January 1900, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur received initiation from Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji. And the story of that initiation is very interesting. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur tells his son, you go and take initiation from Gaura Kishora Babaji. And Gaura Kishora Babaji was what you call an anchorite. He had sworn never to take any disciples. But he was forced to change his decision when he saw Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's determination and devotion. So, this history of how Bhaktisiddhanta accepted initiation from Gaura Kishora Babaji is very interesting. The first time Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur asked Gaura Kishora Babaji to accept him, Gaura Kishora Babaji said, okay, I will ask Mahaprabhu. Of course, Mahaprabhu disappeared 400 years before, right? So he said, I will ask Mahaprabhu, and if he tells me to, I will. So, the second time Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came, and he said, so did you ask Mahaprabhu? And Gaura Kishora Babaji said, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur didn't give up. So he came a third time, and he asked Gaura Kishora Babaji, he says, oh, virtuousness incarnate. No, he said, can you accept me as your disciple? And he said, well, you are a highly decorated or highly renowned scholar of Vedas, and you have many other wonderful qualities. But these qualities will not help you reach or attain Lord Krishna. They do not give you any right to initiation. He said, I asked Mahaprabhu, and he didn't answer. Therefore, he was implying that there's something wrong with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So, and he came more times again to ask him for Gaura Kishora Babaji for initiation, and he kept refusing. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did not in any way abandon his desire to be initiated only by Gaura Kishora Babaji. It is said that Ramanujacharya approached Gostipurna, which is one of his gurus, 18 times, in different times, before he was accepted by Gostipurna. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur demonstrated the qualities of tremendous patience and determination, and continued to come to see Gaura Kishora Babaji Maharaj, humbly entreating him every time to give him initiation, until finally his heart melted, and out of great affection, mercifully initiated Srila Prabhupada, or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, by sprinkling the dust of his lotus feet on his head and on his body. Now, this is described also in the Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava. And this book by Bhakti Vikas Swami. It's a very interesting book. And on page 20, what is it, 7? It says, late in 1898, after performing bhajana for almost 30 years in Brajat Mandala, Sri Gaura Kishora Babaji arrived in Navadvip Dhamma, the birth site of Lord Chaitanya. Babaji Maharaj was a bhajananandi, preferring to live in a holy place to concentrate on chanting rather than going out into the world to establish temples and recruit followers. As Shakshad Vairagya Murti, renunciation personified, he rejected bodily comforts and made little effort to shelter and maintain his body. He ate raw earth, uncooked rice, and other items generally considered inedible. He shunned company, had no patience with pretenders posing as devotees, and ignored or chastised those who approached him. He did not care for any residence. In Navadvipa, he lived for some time under a chai, a detachable wicker awning of a country boat, and for several months in a latrine, or a toilet, a public toilet. His possessions were practically nil. Sometimes he wore cloth taken from dead bodies at the burning ghat, and other times went naked. He had no interest apart from chanting the holy names continuously and associating with the few devotees he recognized as genuine. Toward the end of 1898, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's newly constructed house in Swananda Sukhada Kunja, Sri Siddhanta Saraswati had his first darshan of Babaji Maharaj, who arrived there wearing a tiger skin cap and carrying a basket containing puja paraphernalia, both of which had been given to him by the famed Sri Bhagavan Das Babaji of Kalna. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati became deeply struck upon hearing Babaji Maharaj recite a song articulating Srila Raghunath Dasa Goswami's feelings for Srimati Radharani. He wrote down those esoteric verses and ensouled them in the essence of his own, in other words, he made them part of his life as the essence of his own internal bhajana. So his internal understanding of the relationship with Radha and Krishna. Babaji Maharaj presented, sometime later, Babaji Maharaj presented Sri Siddhanta Saraswati, in other words, Bhakti Siddhanta, with the hat and basket of paraphernalia, as well as 4 or 5 pieces of knotted string for counting japa, and a tilaka stamp with the initials Ha Kri, meaning Hare Krishna. Although practically worthless materially, these gifts were spiritually invaluable, having been given by a Paramahansa to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Although many reputed gurus were desirous to have Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as their own disciple, Bhaktisiddhanta detected their insincerity, spurned their wooing, in other words, was not attracted by their canvassing him, and stood opposed to them. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had been his Shiksha Guru from birth and had given him Harinama and mantras for worshipping Sri Narasingha Deva and Sri Kurma Deva. Yet, so that Sri Siddhanta Saraswati could attain additional spiritual shelter, guidance, and inspiration for his future colossal service, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sent him to Sri Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji for further initiation. Sri Bhakti Siddhanta was decidedly aristocratic, intellectual, and of exemplary virtuous deportment or character, whereas by external consideration, Babaji Maharaj was illiterate, cranky, and crude. Indeed, he was reputed to vehemently refuse people who approached him for diksha initiation, even sometimes beating them with an umbrella. Predictably, he also declined to induct this would-be disciple, caring not a whit for his apparent good qualities, which shook Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur because he was accustomed to being respected. So Gaura Kishora Babaji told him, "I once accepted a disciple, but he cheated me and went away. I will not make any further disciples." But Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was not easily discouraged and again begged for mercy. So Gaura Kishora Babaji responded, "I will ask Mahaprabhu. If he gives permission, your request will be granted." When after a few days, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur returned and inquired, "Well, what was Mahaprabhu's order?" Babaji Maharaj replied, "I forgot to ask." And when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came for a third time, he was directly refused. "I asked," Babaji Maharaj said, "but I did not receive the command of Mahaprabhu." So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was devastated. He stood up and uttered, "Karuna na hoile, kandiya kandiya, pranana rakibo ara." Without your mercy, weeping and weeping, I will no longer sustain my life. In other words, he was contemplating suicide. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur resolved that however many times he might be refused, no further would he rotate in the world without gaining Babaji Maharaj's grace. In other words, he would not do any preaching, he would do nothing, but simply seek to be initiated by Gaura Kishora Babaji, or die. So seeing this young aspirant's genuine desire and commitment, eventually, Gaura Kishora Babaji relented. He told Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to bathe in a nearby Saraswati river, a tributary of the Ganges, and then return, after which he accepted him as a disciple. This was in January 1900. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur later reflected on this incident. Quote, when out of false ego I was thinking, I am a great scholar of mathematics and philosophy, and he was. He was the greatest scholar of his time in India at that time, going back to the 1900s, of philosophy and mathematics and astronomy, astrology. Let any big pundit come at any time, day or night, and I will cut his propositions to pieces. At that time, I got the darshana of the lotus feet of Sri Gurudeva. He ignored everything that was previously appreciated in me, my truthfulness, my moral and pious life, and my intellectualism, knowing them to be of little value. And when I saw that he ignored whatever was good in me, I realized how good he himself must be, who could neglect so many good qualities in me. What inconceivable wealth he possessed. Being neglected by him, I understood that there was no one more fallen and contemptible than myself. That was my actual identity. The very things that I had judged desiderata, meaning desirable, good, such as scholarship and upright character, this exalted soul regarded as valueless. I apprehended that within himself this noble personality possessed a priceless treasure. I then pondered that either he is extremely puffed up or is exceedingly merciful. I then haughtily, meaning with false pride, said to my Gurudev, you are a worshipper of that cheater and debauchee, Krishna. So why would you be compassionate to someone like me, dedicated to ordinary morality? So this is a challenge, right? He's saying, look, Krishna, he doesn't follow any morality, and you're worshiping him. So now I understand why you're not giving me any attention, because I'm a moral person. So see, they're having this rasa, this delectable relationship. Humbly and sincerely, I prayed to the Supreme Lord for his mercy. Later, by his grace, I recognized that without receiving the blessings of this peerless saint, peerless means no one is as pure, no one is equal to him, right? There's no one like him in the world at that time, right? That without serving him, the blessings, without receiving the blessings of this peerless saint and without serving him, nothing good could happen to me. When I accepted that and acted accordingly and then received the causeless, unlimited grace of my Sri Gurudeva and refuge at his lotus feet, I deemed my life fulfilled. In other words, Gaura Kishora Babaji, by rejecting Bhaktisiddhanta many times and basically looking at his achievements in a pejorative way, meaning in a negative way, forced Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to assume a position of complete humility. And this was necessary. This is why his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, sent him to Gaura Kishora Babaji, because there was no one else like him at that time who could break the false pride of his son. who was a renowned scholar, mathematician, astrologer, and a renowned preacher of Bhagavatams, meaning foremost preacher. And he had such a mastery of the English language that even the British were shocked. I had considered my Gurudev to be unequal in Vairagya, but somewhat short of learning. But he reduced to powder my audacity born of book learning. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was a scholar. He had formally studied Sanskrit and the Vedas in the best institutions in India. So now, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says, but he reduced to powder my audacity born of book learning. With the mallet, with the hammer of his mercy, he revealed that whatever I had adjudged to be the highest ideal was in fact most low and despicable. When by his grace that instruction first entered my ears, my diminutive brain, he's saying my puny brain, lacked the capacity to accommodate such transcendental knowledge. See, I wasn't understanding what he was trying to tell me, he says. Although I know the Vedas and all this, but he was trying to tell me something that's transcendental, even to the Vedas. But to all fools like me, he gave the chance to hear such lofty topics. So that's the Vaishnava. Vaishnava is always trying to do good to others and will be patient and tries best to convince another person to surrender to Krishna. I have understood that if the people of this world do not receive the same jolt, meaning the same punch and shock that I received from my Gurudev, Gaura Kishora Babaji Maharaj, then their consciousness will not awaken. So sometimes people have to be shocked into understanding that they're on a precipice ready to fall down to their death by accepting mundane knowledge and the mundane concept of life. Eat, drink, and be merry, because you don't know when you're going to die. So enjoy life to the fullest, eating all kinds of nonsense things, mating with all kinds of nonsense people, and being merry, taking drugs, liquor, alcohol, whatever. Just enjoy life to the fullest, because when you die, everything is over. Okay? So he's saying, but to all fools like me, he gave the chance to hear such lofty topics. Basically, he was criticizing all the accomplishments that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had achieved in that time of his life, when he was at the topmost level of scholarship and mathematics and astrology and language and everything. He had everything, and a good family and fame. He was very famous. People were coming to him to get instructions in the Vedas and so forth. And Gaura Kishora Babaji didn't ascribe even any value to what he had achieved. I have understood that if the people of this world do not receive the same jolt that I received from my Gurudev, then their consciousness will not awaken. Therefore, I am telling everyone, I am more foolish than anyone else on earth. Please, all of you, do not be foolish like me. Do not live your life within the limitation of calculating consciousness. Discuss Vaikuntha Katha, and you will become a great person. I am telling you what I have realized to be supremely beneficial. So, by his becoming belittled by Gaura Kishora Babaji, he's saying, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, if we study Bhagavad-Gita, we'll understand why he's saying this. Because there are 18 points of knowledge in Bhagavad-Gita. The first one is amanitvam. Aman means humility. So any knowledge, any achievement without humility is zero. It's zero. The first point of knowledge is to be humble and meek and not be arrogant and lofty and speak down to people and so forth because one has credentials, PhDs and double PhDs. No, one needs humility. Most people cannot be humble. They are puffed up by their money, by their education, by their fame, by their strength, by their powerful friends, etc. And even the pauper, the poorest man, is proud of his penny. So there's a saying, the pauper is proud of his penny. The pauper means a poor man. So whenever someone accumulates some material stuff and surrounds himself with all kinds of gadgets and stuff, and has a good bank account and a good job, they get puffed up. And they think they've attained the American dream. The American dream. Like I talked about this yesterday, I came to America with the nothing. And now I got the 2 cars and the 3 houses. And I have a wife, but I get rid of this one and get another wife, younger. And I got so much money in the bank. Yeah. This is the American dream. I came with nothing and now I have all these things. As if those things are going to save him from death and rebirth. In fact, they're obstacles in the process of self-realization. So here you have Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has all the credentials. It's extremely intelligent, recognized by many, many people, and mathematician, astrologer, and coming from a very exalted family, everything he has. And Gaura Kishora Babaji flicks it off as if it's nothing. And then Bhaktisiddhanta says, I have understood that if the people of this world do not receive the same jolt, the same punch that I received from my Gurudev, then their consciousness will not awaken. $401k, and I just bought a new Tesla, and my kid is going to get a high score in the SAT and get into Stanford or Harvard or MIT, and this thing and that thing. So I'm okay. TK, TK. No, nothing is TK, TK. See, it's all an illusion. Any moment something could happen. A little block in the artery going to the heart, you could have a stroke or you could die. Right? It could happen in a minute or two. Just like one example is the famous man named Mr. Atkins. Have you heard of the Atkins Diet? Yeah, he gave another 50 years to the meat industry. His theory was, you want to lose weight? Stop eating carbs, carbohydrates. Just eat meat. So it worked. People started just eating meat. They refused to have spaghetti and pizza and all that stuff. And they started losing weight. So he became, at first people said, well, this is nonsense. How are you going to lose weight just eating meat? But it worked. And he became very famous and very rich. He had a beautiful apartment in downtown Manhattan. They cost at least $5 to $10 million. He had an office in downtown Manhattan that he was renting for, $15,000 or $20,000 a month, but he could afford it. And one day in the winter, he was walking from his penthouse to his office, and he had brand new shoes on, very expensive Gucci clothing, and he had a Rolex, a golden Rolex, everything. It's at the peak of his fame and his wealth. He's walking down the street, and he had these brand new Florsheim shoes. You ever hear of Florsheim? They're very, very, very expensive shoes, right? But they were brand new. So there was a little bit of ice. He didn't see it. He slipped on it, fell backwards, cracked his head, and died. Right at the peak of his success. Did he know he was going to die that day? No. He was walking around in his expensive shoes, expensive clothing, his expensive jewelry, and he was going to make another $100,000 or $1 million that day, peddling his meat diet, and he dies. So, therefore, nothing is certain in this world except one thing, death. Death is a certain thing. It's going to happen to everyone. No one can escape it. Even Jesus Christ, he died on the cross before he resurrected. He had to die because that's the law of nature. So, although Babaji Maharaj always strictly forbade anyone to touch his feet, once he voluntarily placed them on Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's head and ordered him, preach the absolute truth, keeping aside all other activities, thus confirming his disciples' life mission. So this was his order to Bhaktisiddhanta. Although he himself was a Bhajanananda, he never, he preached somewhat, but not too much. He avoided the association of people. He was always chanting Hare Krishna and meditating on Krishna and reading about Krishna, or although he was illiterate, he would have someone read to him about Krishna and his pastimes and so forth, read the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad-Gita. So, referring to this incident in later years, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur commented, on receiving a jerk of lotus feet of Sri Gurudev, in other words, receiving the lotus feet of Gaura Kishora Babaji on his head, for the span of 1 year, I lost all sense of external cosmos. In other words, for 1 year, he was stunned. And he was not really living in the material world. He was in ecstasy for receiving the feet of Gaura Kishora Babaji on his head. I do not know whether any transcendental agent equal to him has ever appeared in this planet. How may those who are preoccupied with worldly lust, anger, and so on ever know him? So, unless he was so determined to be initiated by Gaura Kishora Babaji, it wouldn't have happened. And he was tested by Gaura Kishora Babaji to see how sincere he was. Now, most people say, oh, who does he think? He can't even read. I'm a big scholar, and he rejected me. I reject him. See, that's what they would say, right? But no, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur realized, wait a minute, he's actually teaching me something. That's why my father, so he went back to his father several times and said, oh, he doesn't want me to be his disciple. He said that I'm a very great scholar and he can't read. Bhaktivinoda said, go back to him again. Don't talk nonsense like that, right? So now he's saying, how can those who are preoccupied with worldly lust, anger, and so on ever know him? Why would, because of their false, puffed up, false ego, they would reject him and say, oh, this is a nasty old man. He's telling me to get out of here, and I'll reject him. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur continues, I have been busy within the temporal sphere, trying to bring sense gratification within the grasp of my hand. I often thought that by obtaining the objects of sensual enjoyment, all my shortcomings would be fulfilled. Certainly I attained various rarely achieved goals, but my own personal deficiencies were never mitigated. In this material world, I have had the association of very high-class, well-born people, but noting their multiple inadequacies, I could not offer them praise. So, he's saying not only he was puffed up, but he met people that were more puffed up than him, and he could see that there were things that were missing in those people, and therefore he couldn't praise them. But it was only his guru, Gaura Kishora Babaji, who pointed out to him his inadequacies, being puffed up due to such success, spectacular success that he had. Seeing me as such a lamentable condition, at such a time of adversity, the most merciful Lord Gaurasundara gave permission to his two dearest devotees, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his father, and Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji to grant their blessings to me, because I was always intoxicated with worldly false ego, wanting to be lauded, wanting to be praised again and again. So that's called pratishta in Sanskrit, the desire to be honored. So many people have the desire to be honored, right? Everybody has it. They want to say, they want people to say, oh, he's such a good person, and he knows this, and he knows that, and he did this. Just like Obama, he used to always praise himself in a speech. He's supposed to give a speech about George Washington, and he said, well, I did this, and I did that, and over there, that's something I did too, and over here, I did this, and I did. He would have more I's in a speech than thes. And then you have to do that, because everyone says the, and. He had more I's than does and ands. He was always talking about himself, right? Even though he's supposed to be talking about somebody else, right? So everybody wants to be honored. And this is explained, anyway. So seeing me in such a lamentable condition as at such a time of adversity, the most merciful Lord Guru Sundar, meaning Lord Chaitanya, gave permission to his two most dearest devotees, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur and Srila Gaura Kishora Babaji, Dasa Babaji, to grant their blessings to me, because I was always intoxicated with worldly false ego, wanting to be praised again and again. I was depriving myself of my own true benefit. But due to the influence of pious activities enacted in previous births, I came in contact with Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, my spiritual well-wisher. My Prabhu, Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji, would often visit Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur and stay with him. Out of compassion for others, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur pointed out my Prabhu, Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji, upon seeing whom the extent of my worldly false ego diminished. I knew that all living entities who have taken the human form of life were fallen and low like myself. But by gradually observing the spiritual fiber of my master, my guru, I realized that only a Vaishnava could reside on this mortal plane and be of exemplary character. Only a Vaishnava. My Gurudev mercifully told me, reject your knowledge, your purity and aristocracy, and come close to me. Don't go anywhere else. Whatever you require, as many rooms, houses, palaces, and mansions, as much scholarship, skills, self-control, and renunciation, you will get. Simply come close to me. Let there be a house, let there be an entrance, let there be learning. Do not be enamored by this type of thinking. So he's saying, all these things that you accomplish, forget them. You just come and associate with me. Do not consider as necessities that which ordinary people accept as such. See, ordinary people, I got to have the washing machine. I got to have the dryer. I can't have a washing machine without a dryer. And I got to have the Tesla because my neighbor got one, and I'm going to get a bigger one than him. And I got to have my kids, I got to keep pushing them to be academically excellent so they can get into Stanford, or they can get into MIT, or they can get into Princeton and become a real demon when they graduate, like George Bush, or like this one or that one. The Princeton graduate's usually the worst of the worst. And by the way, all these institutions began by religious Christian groups. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all of those schools were started by religious Christians. And today they are the bastions, the powerful forts of atheism and perversion. You go there, you end up becoming a activist to destroy American culture. That's what they're teaching, how to destroy American culture. That's not to say that American culture is the best culture. That needs to be changed. But see, they want to destroy, and Prabhupada came to purify. There's a big difference between the two. Prabhupada didn't come to destroy anything. He came to purify things. Because they were all started originally by Christian missionaries or Christians, right? And they morphed, they changed into these horrible institutions of atheism. Right? So then, furthermore, he says, so Gaura Kishora Babaji tells Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, do not consider as necessities those things which ordinary people accept as such. Then he says, later on when I met my preceptor, or meaning Gaura Kishora Babaji, his deeds and actions gave me entire satisfaction as to mastering the subject I was so earnestly searching for. What was that? Krishna, right? So he says, I became a practical man in associating myself with this great master of religious atmosphere from the day I actually met him. It was by providential dispensation, in other words, the mercy of God, that I was able to fully understand the language and practical side of devotion after I had met the practicing master and on my full submission unto him. So in other words, he's saying, look, I had plenty of knowledge. I had plenty of validation by great scholars that I was the greatest scholar. And I had great achievements that nobody else was able to do. But I didn't have the practical knowledge of Bhakti Yoga. I had knowledge of it, but I didn't know how to put it into practice. This is Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur saying it. He said, I didn't have that practical application until I actually met Gaura Kishora Babaji, who was the epitome, the perfect example of renunciation and full dedication to Krishna. I had never met a person like that, except my father. But my father sent me to him to break my false ego. False ego because of all the achievements I had made. So he says, no education could have prepared me for the good fortune of understanding my master's attitude. He said, I could not have learned this in any institution of education in the world. Even the best would not have been able to teach me what my Guru Dev, Gaura Kishora Babaji, taught me. See? And it's true. So, like one of my kids went to UW, and she joined a extracurricular club of kids like herself who decided to study the Bhagavad-Gita. So they were meeting in the house of this one student of UW who is extremely wealthy. Her father is extremely wealthy. They live in Medina. They have a gigantic house. They have an entire basketball court in their house and swimming pool. And it's not a house. It's like, it's like the Walmart of sense gratification. So I asked her one day, I said, how do you study the Bhagavad Gita? She said, oh, well, we all sit down in sort of like in a circle, and each one reads something, one verse in Bhagavad Gita, and then the lady of the house, I mean the girl that was organizing the group, she said, and now let's go one by one. Everyone tell me what you think this verse means. So they go around, and each person gives their own opinion about what they think the verse means. So that's like asking a group of monkeys to explain calculus, right? What do they think calculus means, right? So how close do you think they'll get to what the real meaning is? So that's ridiculous, right? So let's say you have a heart palpitation. So you go to the local grocer and say, sir, can you tell me why my heart is palpitating? You say, well, I think it's because you didn't buy sirloin steak from me. Well, because he makes money by selling sirloin steak, right? So, yeah, but that's an opinion, right? That's not getting to the core, the real reason why his heart is palpitating. So the same thing, getting opinions is not getting the truth necessarily. Anyone can give their opinion. And if you go to someone who's not qualified, they'll give you all kinds of opinions that don't mean anything. So, therefore, if you want to learn, so Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is saying, I could not have No education could have prepared me for the good fortune of understanding my master's attitude. He is free and adept in all movements regarding the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and the Srimad Bhagavatam. Before I met him, my impression was that the writings of the devotional school could not be fully realized in a practical life in this world. See, that's the whole point. The practical application of Krishna consciousness is an enigmatic issue. People know the philosophy, but they don't know how to make it practical for normal people to practice. So, he says, before I met him, my impression was that the writings of the devotional school could not be fully realized in a practical life in this world. My study of the master, of my guru, Gaura Kishora Babaji, and then the study of the books, along with the explanations of Thakur Bhakti Vinoda, gave me ample facility to advance toward the true spiritual life. Before I met my master, I had not written anything about real religion. Up to that time, my idea of religion was confined to books and to a strict ethical life. But that sort of life was found imperfect unless I came in touch with the practical side of things. This is amazing statements by Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur in relation to his guru, Gaura Kishora Babaji, who was illiterate. He could not read. And here, a person who's the most literate is surrendering to him and learning what he could not learn through all his books. The practical application of Krishna consciousness that becomes meaningful to the ordinary person in society. So continuing, I don't want to go too long today. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur further wrote, many people saw Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji, whether innocent or experienced, young or old, learned or ignorant, or proud of their being advanced devotees. They were not able to truly see him. Here's a man who's living, his dwelling is the local outhouse, or local latrine in Navadvip, where people come and pass stool and urine. And he's living in one of the stalls. Why did he do that? So that people wouldn't bother him, because they were bothering him all the time. Asirbat, 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 Maharaj, Asirbat, Asirbat. Asirbat. What kind of Asirbat they're asking for, right? Oh, let me let my business do better. My wife has a backache. Get rid of that backache. My kid has to pass the SAT. Let him pass the SAT. That's the Asirbat they're asking for. Right? So, Gaura Kishora Babaji, at that time, over 120 years ago, he had the same problem. Everyone's coming to him, Asirbat Maharaj, Asirbat, Asirbat, you know. But all they're asking for is, let me succeed materially, not let me succeed spiritually. So, many people who saw Gaura Kishora Babaji, Dasa Babaji, whether innocent or experienced, young or old, learned or ignorant, or proud of their being advanced devotees, were not able to truly see him. This is the divine power of Krishna's devotees. Hundreds of people came to him seeking help in fulfilling their material desires, and he would give them advice, but this was a kind of deception. There were countless persons who take on the dress of a saintly person and make a show of acting like saintly person, but in closer analysis are far from the standard. My Prabhu was not a cheater like them. It is clear from his spiritual activities that he identified complete honesty with the truth. His sincere affection was incomparable. It proved that the attainment of spiritual powers is a deception. He showed no enmity to those who opposed him or disagreed with him. Similarly, he made no particular external show of affection for those who were objects of his compassion. He used to say, I neither love nor hate anyone in this world. Everyone is the object of my respect. Amazingly, my guru would be surrounded by people with no understanding, fakers and materialists inimical to the path of pure devotion, who thought themselves to be recipients of such a saintly person's mercy, but continued to engage in sensual activities. My Guru never openly rejected any of these people, but he never openly accepted any of them either. So, Gaura Kishora Babaji Maharaj was an expert judge of character and had highly developed foresight and clairvoyance, often foretelling events in the distant future. On the 30th of Kartika 1322, or the Bengali 1915, Paramahansa Sri Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji entered the eternal pastimes of the Lord. In other words, he left his body. At the time, he was residing in Rainira Dharma Shala in Kulia, when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami received the news of his disappearance. He was overcome with feelings of separation from his guru and immediately hurried to the site of his departure. He was heartbroken to see that Mahantas, abbots of various akaryas or ashramas, were busily arguing about where and how to bury his body. Why? Each one wanted his body to be buried in their ashram, so that many people would come to see Gaura Kishora Babaji's samadhi. In other words, they would make more money with all the crowd that would come. The idea of the Babajis was to lay claim to any future samadhi temple. As such, a temple would be an attractive pilgrimage site and a possible source of money-making. Srila Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati alone stood up and spoke out against this rascaldom. As things heated up, Navadip's chief of police, Jatindranath Singh Rai Bahadur, came to maintain the peace. At that time, Srila Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had not yet taken Tridandi sannyas. The Babajis argued that as they had taken the renounced order, they had the right to perform the last rites for one of their order. As this was not the case for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had no rights. But he, Bhaktisiddhanta, displayed his spiritual strength and stated that he was Babaji Maharaj's one and only disciple. He then asked them if there was any amongst them who had not had illicit sexual relations in the previous 6 months, or even in the previous 3 months, or 1 month, or even in the previous 3 days. He had done so. He who had so done would be doomed if he touched Babaji Maharaj's divine remains. When he heard Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's challenge, Jatindra Babu asked how anyone could prove whether or not he had illicit sexual relations. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur answered that he would take anyone who came forward at his word. When the Babajis looked at the effulgence of pure spiritual practice emanating from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they slowly slunk away one by one. Slunk, it's like, walking away, slunking. The chief of police was embarrassed at this sight, and he paid his obeisances to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and then left himself. Some residents of Kulia told Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that Babaji Maharaj had said about his last desires. Apparently he had stated that he wished his body to be dragged through the streets of Navadvip so that it would be covered by the dust of the holy Dham. Srila Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur replied, "This is my Guru Deva. Even Krishna is honored to carry him on his shoulders and carries him like a crown upon his head. He said these things to confound the pride of the materialist with his humility." In other words, he didn't really mean it, but he wanted to show all the people puffed up with their material opulences his humility. He was willing to be dragged through the streets to get their mercy, the dust that touched their feet on his body. When Haridas Thakur entered his eternal pastimes, Lord Gauranga took his body to his chest and danced with it. What a precedent he set for honoring the perfected soul's departure. We would rather follow Mahaprabhu's example and carry Siddha Baba's divine remains on our head. On the first day of Agrahayan in Kulia's Nutana Karya, Srila Prabhupada performed the Samadhi rites. In other words, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur performed the Samadhi rites for Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji according to Vaishnava Smriti injunctions. A certain Podar Mahashaya of Lohagaria in Jessore district gave the land for the Samadhi, renouncing any claims to the property. Later, however, he reneged on his promise and came to live there himself and engaged in various illicit activities on the site. During the Ganges floods one season, the Samadhi temple was washed into the river. And on 1932, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur retrieved some of his guru's remains, the remains of his body, from the Ganges bed and took them to the Chaitanya Mat, the temple that he opened, where Lord Chaitanya appeared, where he established a Samadhi temple on the banks of Radhakund. Radhakund is a pond inside the complex of the Chaitanya Mat, or Chaitanya Temple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. The site was consecrated on the 2nd of Ashvina, 1932, and in the course of time, a small temple housing a murti of Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji was constructed there. The murti's Nitya Seva has continued ever since. So, Gaura Kishora Babaji's teachings. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur told of a few events of Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji's life, which are full of important instructions for practitioners of devotional life. On one occasion, a certain Babaji came to visit Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji with some of his followers following him. These acolytes began glorifying their guru to Babaji Maharaj. Our Prabhu is so merciful. He takes so much trouble to travel from place to place to deliver the poor, fallen souls. If he did not travel, what would be the destiny of these forsaken places? Gaura Kishora Babaji immediately became angry and answered, if someone makes a pretense of delivering the world when in fact is only interested in making money and getting dakshina and garnering prestige, he not only does not no one any good, but falls down for having cheated others. One day a few devotees were describing the expertise of a particular lecturer on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Gaura Kishora Babaji knew that this individual received money for his services. He said, this fellow does not explain the Bhagavad or the scriptures of the Goswamis. He is simply speaking on the sense gratification scriptures. He isn't chanting Gaura Gaura or Krishna Krishna, but he's chanting money, money, rupiah, rupiah. It has nothing to do with bhajana. The end result is that the true Vaishnava religion is obscured. Nothing good can come from it. Indeed, the world will be harmed by such preaching. One day, point 3, one day Babaji Mahashaya, or Gaura Kishora Babaji, was chanting japa late at night when he suddenly jumped up and exclaimed, did you see that? Did you see? A professional speaker on the Bhagavad has gone to Pabna district and has just made a chaste woman break her vows. What a shame! These rascals are giving Mahaprabhu's religion a bad name. He spoke as if he were personally witnessing the event. So, yeah, Gaura Kishora Babaji was a Trikalagya. He could see past, present, and future. So I'm going to read something that's interesting here from Bhakti Vikas Maharaj's book. And it's called Pastimes with Sri Gurudev, with Gaura Kishora Babaji. In 1906, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was lecturing in Kulia. Kulia is a neighborhood of Navadvip, on the 3 grades of devotees, Kanista, neophyte, Madhyama, intermediate, and Uttama, topmost. Having dilated, or having explained, on the first 2 categories with reference to the appropriate verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, chapter 2, verse 46 to 47. He then quoted the corresponding sloka describing an Uttama Adhikari. Sarvabhute suya pasyat bhagavat bhavam atmana. Bhutani bhagavat atmani esa bhagavatot tatmaha. The most advanced devotee sees within everything the soul of all souls, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Consequently, he systematically sees everything in relation to the Supreme Lord and understands that everything that exists is eternally situated within the Lord. Srimad Bhagavatam 11.2.45. In other words, when a pure devotee sees things, he doesn't see the thing itself, but he sees the presence of the Lord in that person or that thing, and sees how everything is in relationship to Krishna. Nothing is separate, nothing is independent of the Lord. Therefore, that is called a universal spiritual vision of things or people. Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati continued, "What more shall I do to explain this verse? My Gurudeva, the personified manifestation of this statement, presently resides here among us in Kulia. Anyone competent to study his character will be able to appreciate the meaning of Uttama. Tama means ignorance. Ut means completely above all material ignorance. Thus then, just then, impelled by the Lord dwelling in the heart, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur turned and beheld his spiritual master among the listeners, though up to that point he had been unaware of his Guru Deva's presence. Thereupon, Babaji Maharaj, or Gaura Kishora Babaji, immediately left the assembly, not wanting to hear praise of himself. Now and then, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati sent fruits and vegetables grown in Mayapur to Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji, who would accept them with great adoration, touch them to his head and chest, and in due time offer them to Lord Nityananda Prabhu and partake of his remnants. A Brahmana youth from Calcutta named Mitra, although from a well-to-do background, once arrived at the Yogapita, meaning the temple of the Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhakti Vinod built, which was the original appearance place of Lord Chaitanya. And he was dressed only in tattered and grubby cloth that covered only his loins and thighs. Seeking a guru who fit his ideal of complete renunciation, he spent a few days discussing deeply with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, but felt in disgust upon beholding that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was absorbed in managing the estate of the Yogapita and arranging for extra properties. Convinced that he had nothing to gain from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Mitra set out for Kulia to see what he could get from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's guru, famed as the greatest renunciate of that time, meaning Gaura Kishora Babaji. Gradually, that youth became the foremost of Srila Gaura Kishora Dasa Babaji's assistants. But as his responsibility grew, so did his false ego. And he became so conceited and bossy that whenever Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came for darshana of Gaura Kishora Babaji, Mitra refused him entrance and closed the door on him, leaving Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur simply to offer a dandavat to his Gurudev from outside. Mitra appointed himself as the custodian of the plentiful milk products and other rich foods offered to Babaji Maharaj, offered to Gaura Kishora Babaji, disobeying his guru's order to not accept them, assuring donors that he had given their offerings to Babaji Maharaj. Mitra would himself devour them or eat them. Fortified by such nutrition, he spent his nights enjoying others' wives. One day, while Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was visiting, Babaji or Gaura Kishora Babaji scolded another for touching his lotus feet, after which he called Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to his side and in Mitra's presence voluntarily took his own foot dust and smeared it on Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's head. In humility, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, believing himself out of favor, considered this bestowal of foot dust a sarcastic masquerade to underline his severe offensiveness. A few days later, so in other words, he misunderstood what happened. Rather than thinking it was Gaura Kishora Babaji's mercy, Gaura Kishora Babaji was demonstrating his disfavor, although he would never give anyone the dust of his lotus feet. And so actually it was not his disfavor, as we'll see as we go along in this story. A few days later, Babaji Maharaj decided to shift residence to an outhouse, to a toilet, a public toilet of Kuliya Dharmashala, which Mitra arranged to be thoroughly cleaned. About 6 months later, when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur again came for darshana of his Gurudeva, Mitra came out of the latrine. He was occupying an adjacent one to Babaji Maharaj and told him, Bhaktisiddhanta, that he would not be allowed into Babaji Maharaj's presence. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati replied that at least Gaura Kishora Babaji Maharaj should be informed of his arrival. Recognizing Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's voice, Gaura Kishora Babaji emerged from his toilet privy where he was living. He was sleeping there, right? He wasn't passing stool there, he was sleeping there. And told him, go bring Bhakti Vinod Prabhu from the world of Kali to Godruma. So when he's referring to the world of Kali, he's referring to Calcutta. He said that Calcutta is a place where Kali Mata lives, and everyone is in Maya. And he said, go and bring your Bhakti Vinod Prabhu, because Bhakti Vinod also had a residence in Calcutta because he was a magistrate, right? And he said, bring him from the world of Kali to Godruma, to where he was. People are attacking me with their annoying talk. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur respectfully inquired, are you testing me? If the good fortune that I received as the dust from your lotus feet on my head is continuing, then I will not be deluded by your deceptive pastimes. Is it that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur does not for a moment reside anywhere else but Sri Radhakund, or that you reside elsewhere than Sri Radhakund? In other words, both Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Gaura Kishora Babaji were fully immersed in thinking of Radharani and Krishna's transcendental pastimes. And Radhakund is the most holy place in the whole universe. It's a little bit on the outskirts of Vrindavan. It takes about an hour to get there, and it's next to Govardhan and Govardhan Parvat. And Radha and Krishna had their most intimate pastimes there in this Kund. There's Radha Kund and Krishna Kund together, and Kund is like a big pond. It's still there today. You can go there. It's considered the most holiest place in the universe because the Lord had his intimate pastimes there. Are you testing me? If the good fortune that I received as the dust from your lotus feet on my head is continuing, then I will not be deluded by your deceptive pastimes. Is it that Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur does not for a moment reside anywhere else but Sri Radhakund, or that you reside elsewhere than Sri Radhakund? That you have entered a latrine is simply your pastime to appraise of their own situation, those who desire the excreta of money and women and prestige. In other words, you're saying, you have entered and living in this latrine, this toilet, to simply show to others their own situation, who desire the stool of money and victims of their sense gratification and prestige. Despite observing you in the stool house, I shall never be deprived of the dust of your lotus feet. Babaji Maharaj responded, yes, I know that Bhakti Vinod Prabhu and yourself are directly Nityananda Prabhu. Nityananda is the original guru, the original first expansion of Krishna. Krishna's first expansion is Balaram, and Balaram appeared as Lord Nityananda, Lord Chaitanya's pastime, and Lord Chaitanya is Krishna who appeared. And Golokera Premadana, Harinama Sankirtan. They both came from the spiritual world to spread the glories of the holy name of Krishna and the mantra Hare Krishna. So Babaji Maharaj responded, yes, I know that Bhaktivinoda Prabhu and yourself are directly Nityananda. All your activities are according to Mahaprabhu's desire. So Mahaprabhu ordered Nityananda to preach to the most fallen people. So he's saying, yeah, I know you two are like Nityananda. You're preaching to the most fallen people. How can insignificant people comprehend you? He then recounted how he had discovered Mitra to be a philanderer and an epicure. So philanderer means he's trying to enjoy the wives of other men, and epicure means he's eating opulent food, which a sadhu should never do. And turning to Mitra, advised him to go home, get a job, and end his hypocrisy. After returning to secular life, although returning to secular life was most humiliating, even for a show bottle renunciate, which probably was why so many pseudo-renunciants maintained their charade, the hapless youth actually followed Babaji Maharaj's sage advice, his ideals having been consumed by false pride and offensiveness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati maintained that he had no relationship with several such hangers-on who considered themselves disciples or associates of Gaura Kishora Babaji, but had never understood his actual glories or indeed anything about Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. There's a lot more. Obviously, Gaura Kishora Babaji was an exceptionally elevated Vaishnava, although he was illiterate, or at least he appeared to be illiterate, and although he demonstrated by his own activities the foolishness of other people. Not that he was foolish, but he showed them the foolishness of their ways, that becoming dupes of Maya, in other words, becoming fooled by Maya into thinking that the purpose of life is sense gratification, eating, sleeping, mating, and speculating. Say, that's not the purpose of human life. The purpose of human life is to chant, dance, take prasadam, and glorify Krishna by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, and then helping others come to this life of ecstatic love for the Lord. That's the real purpose of human life, to go back eventually to Krishna Loka, where there's no more birth, death, old age, disease. There's no more material body. There's a spiritual body that is the origin of anything material, and to not be encumbered by old age, disease, and death, to have eternal life and eternal bliss in the association of Krishna and his exalted devotees. So everybody should want this. Everybody should understand that Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Dosana Darshanam, that there's an evil, there's evil in birth, death, old age, and disease. These things are evil things. They're not actually real. The real life of a person is eternal bliss and knowledge in the association of Krishna and his eternal devotees in the spiritual world. So birth, death, old age, and disease are evil things that are unnecessary. But because we have voluntarily walked away from Krishna, and we continue voluntarily walking away from Krishna even now, so the original thing that we did, which is the cause of our misery, we're still doing today. And once we develop the desire to hear Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by genuine devotees, and understand what is the real purpose of human life, we continue the folly of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending like animals, and avoiding any possibility, in other words, sequestering ourselves in a vacuum, so we can't hear anything spiritual. Then we can't get any good spiritual advice, and therefore we go up right to the moment of death, confused about what is the purpose of life, and and worn out by all the sense gratification we've engaged in, and die in ignorance and have to take birth again, and with no guarantee that it'll be a human body, and continue the same cyclic misery, birth, death, old age, and disease. See? So, unless we understand what is the purpose of life, to free ourselves from this unnecessary birth, old age, disease, and death in a temporary body that's always changing, we remain prisoners, and the prison is a prison that we built ourselves. It's like a cocoon for a worm. So there was once a man, and he was arrested by a demon and put into a dungeon jail. And the demon was this big, hairy, horrible-looking person. And once a day, he would walk down to the dungeon, and he was a very heavy-set demon, and every step he would take would sort of shake the earth a little bit, and the man in the prison of the demon would hear it, and he would be frightened. He would be terror-stricken, and a demon would come up to the door, and he could hear his heavy breathing, and he would throw some pieces of bread and some things into the door. He would open the door of the prison, the squeaky, heavy door, and he would be standing there like that, and throw some food to him and scare him, terrorize him. And then he would close the door and go away. So this went on for some time, and the man said, look, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'd rather die than go through this terror. So he said, the next time he comes down here, I'm gonna say, okay, come on, let's fight. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I want to die. I'm not afraid of dying. So the next time the demon came down, like that, and all of a sudden the creaky door, opening the door, and he's like, and the man was standing there and said, and when the demon wanted to give him some food, he took it and threw it at him. He said, come on now, we're going to fight now. And the demon said, he started screaming and made loud noises like a lion, and the man said, and so they kept looking at each other, and the man said, okay, come on. And he said, come on, do something, and he started going to one side a little bit, and then the demon went a little bit to one side, and he kept going a little bit like this, waiting for the demon to grab him, and the demon didn't grab him, but he was like that right next to him, and he could smell his bad breath and everything, but by chance, now he was on the outside and the demon was on the inside. So he was thinking, what happened here? He's looking at the demon. The demon's looking at him like that, but he's not doing anything. So the man said, well, he doesn't want me here. So he just turns around and walks up the steps, and he looks outside, and there are plenty of other demons there. They're guards and everything, and they're heavily armed. And so he said, well, maybe I'll die here then. So he walks out, and everybody's looking at him. There's about 30, 40 of these demons out there. And he's looking at each one of them, but they're not doing anything. So he just keeps walking toward the exit, and there are big, heavy guards there and big guys there. And he looks at them, and they look at him really mean, Then he just walks past them and walks out. Then he realized he was not really in jail. He was just imagining it. Although the demons were real, the jail was real, but he had accepted that, as if that was the real thing. But it turned out not to be real. So this is an allegorical history or story that shows that our imprisonment in this body and being subject to the laws of nature, birth, death, old age, and disease, are actually not real. If we just take to our original reality, which is our existence in the spiritual world, and practice Krishna consciousness, and Lord Chaitanya 500 years ago came to make it really easy, because it's very hard to be spiritual in this age. because there's so much misinformation and false lies passing as knowledge. So, therefore, he gave a very simple process. Previously, like in previous ages, like Satya Yuga, Vishwamuni had to meditate 60,000 years before he attained some spiritual perfection. But in Kali Yuga, we only live 100 years, and not most people don't live 100 years. So Lord Chaitanya made it very easy. He said, look, just chant Hare Krishna. Anybody can chant. You don't have to even understand the words. Just chant. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. And dance. And when you feel a little tired, sit down and take prasadam to your full satisfaction. And then if you have a little more energy, listen to the class. Classes are going on all the time on Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And then if you understand something, you go out and preach and do Harinam Sankirtan in the streets and give people prasadam and tell them about Krishna and give them books and get them to dance also and chant with you. Right? And always come back to the temple and do seva, service, in the association of good devotees. So if you do that, you go back to Godhead very easily. And it's fun. And when people want to have a good time, what do? They sing, they dance, they eat good food, and they're happy. So this is, when Prabhupada came to America, he said, I'm going to make the hippies happies. So all the hippies were frustrated with modern civilization, but they thought they were happy by smoking marijuana and taking LSD, but no, they were ruining each other, ruining themselves. But when Prabhupada came, he made the hippies happy by getting them to dance, chant, take prasadam to satisfaction, and hear Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and go out in the streets and chant and dance. And that way the movement grew exponentially in the 1970s and some part of the 1980s, and it's still growing. So therefore, learn from today's explanation about Gaura Kishora Babaji that you can have a very happy life now and go back to Godhead simply by becoming Krishna conscious. You don't need to be educated. I mean, you can get educated, that's okay, but it's that education is junk. It's all a bunch of misinformation. And but because you got stuck in it now, that's okay. You can work, but you have to balance it. Just like if you go to school 8 hours a day, and then you get a job and you're working 8 to 10 or 12 hours a day, how many hours should you be reading and hearing Bhagavad-Gita and taking prasadam and coming to the temple and doing seva to offset all that negativity of the material world? See? So that's why we have temples, that you can offset all the negativity that you're getting all day long. I got to go take my kid to the soccer game, and I have to take this one to Bharatanatyam dance. And then my husband, I have to cook for him, and then I have to clean all the clothes, and I have to iron everything. And I'm going to get a maid, but the maid can't come on this day or that day. My God, this is too much. And then my husband wants to have another baby. This is crazy. I'm going to die. You see? And the husband is saying, oh, she's making me work so hard. I have to bring in so much money. We have to pay this. She's got to get a job again. You know, we can't pay all these things. So it's all anxiety. See? But you become Krishna conscious. You have to offset all that anxiety with positive spiritual advancement, and it's very easy. So I'll stop right there. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma.
Bandhamoi Shabadana Mate.
Bandhamoi Shabadana Mate.
Bandhamoi Shabadana Mate.
Bandhamoi Shabadana Mate.
Jahar Prasade Bai He Bhavato Riya Jai.
Jahar Prasade Bai He Bhavato Riya Jai.
Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoite.
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite.
Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoite.
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite.
Gurur Mukha Padma Baika Chitte Ko Riyaika. Gurur Mukha Haranako Riya Mone Asha. Harana koriyo mone asha.
Harana koriya mane asa.
Shri Guru Charane rati Eshayo tamagati. Shri Guru
Charane rati aise utamagati.
Je prasade pure sarva asha.
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 चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से.
दान दिला जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से.
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से.
दान दिला जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से.
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशित.
हृदय प्रकाशित.
ओ दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशित.
हृदय प्रकाशित.
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होइते अविद्या विनाश जाइते. प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होइते अविद्या विनाश जाइते. वेदे गाय जहार चरित्र. ओ वेदे गाय जार चरित्र. Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janara Bandhu
Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu
Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adama Janara Bandhu
Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu
Loknath Lokera Jivana Loknath Lokera Jivana आहा प्रभु कर दया दे हमारे पद छाया आहा प्रभु कर दया दे हमारे पद छाया हे बेजज गुश त्रिभुवना ओ हे बेजज गुश त्रिभुवना जय प्रभुपद 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 जय प्रभुपद जय गौर किशोर दास बाबाजी महाराज गौर किशोर दास बाबाजी महाराज नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल
हरि बोल नित्य गौर हरि बोल
नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी नित्य नामिने
विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunnavadi Pashanto Deshatarine
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskadya Desatarine
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Rama
Rama Rama Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Jaya Gaura Kishora Dasa, Jaya Babaji Maharaj, Gaura Kishora Dasa, Jaya Babaji Maharaj. Gaura Kishora Dasa, Jaya Babaji Maharaj.
Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahansa Parajikachasta Tarasatarashi, Shimadi's Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Anantakote Vaishnavinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Shakaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Dvaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Ki Jai, Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ganga Maya Ki Jai, Jamuna Maya Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktavinda Ki Jai, Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Gaura Kishora Babaji Maharaj, Tirubhava Ki Jai, Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the simple, all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to the simple devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavani Ki Jai. Namah Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vistaya. Pushpanjali Ki Jai. Om Aganyatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Saidvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakan Anvitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Guruvani Devi Guruvani Pracharine. I'm sorry. Yeah. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namine Shivasavanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Madhur Ujjvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Apasitanta Dvantaharine Namo Gaura Kishoraya Shakshad Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambu Jayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Satchidananda Namine Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupa Nuga Virayate Gauravir Baba Bhumestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhaumashri Shri Jagannatayate Namaha Vanchakalpatarabhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhivacha Patittanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guru Chuse Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Saktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jayatam Surator Pangur Mama Mandamatir Gati Matsarva Swapadambojo Radha Madana Mohano Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpadrumadaha Srimad Ratnagara Simhasanastato Srimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prestali Bihi Sevyamanos Marami Shiman Rasa Rasarambi Vamsivata Tatastitaha Karsan Venuswanir Gopir Gopinatak Striyestuna Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Namo Gaura Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Gaura Kishoraya Shakshadvairagya Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Esa Pushpanjali Swaha Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bolo, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Bolo, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Oh, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Namo Gaura Kishoraya Shakshadvairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Esa Pushpanjali Swaha. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Namo Gaura Kishoraya Shakshad Vairagyamurtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Esha Pushpanjali Swaha. Hare Krishna, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. श्री श्री राधा नील माधव भगवान की जय.
I want to thank everyone for coming to Gaura Kishora Babaji's Disappearance Festival. We're very lucky to have connection to a transcendental person like Gaura Kishora Babaji. We can learn many things from his example of total dedication to Krishna. And we want to ask for his mercy today. And we're very thankful to have a relationship with Srila Prabhupada, with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Gaura Kishora Babaji, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, and Narottam Das Thakur, all these great, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the 6 Goswamis, and eventually Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Vyasadeva, Narada Muni, Krishna himself. What an exalted family of great pure Vaishnavas. So we should all be inspired by their example and go out on Sankirtan and chant Hare Krishna and spread the burritos. It's burrito Sankirtan. But just by tasting the burrito, you can see that article downstairs. One man tasted burritos many years ago, and then he had another one, and then he wrote a whole article in The Stranger about how wonderful the Krishna devotees are that distribute such wonderful prasadam to the public for free. Yeah. And by the way, burritos, they cost a lot of money to make. Right? They're not cheap. The way we make them, they're expensive. They would sell for at least $12 a piece.
Yesterday, somebody sent this text. Is the text? Yeah. Somebody texted me. They say, also, oh my God.
So somebody texted yesterday, a person who ate a burrito. He said, "Oh my God, this is the best burrito I've had in ages. Great way to end my night." Haribol. Yeah, so Burrito Sankirtan is working. Haribol. We have to expand it. Haribol. One of these days we'll have like 5 Sankirtan parties going out. Right? And distribute burritos to everybody. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Please take prasadam and chant Hare Krishna and be happy.